Hello, everybody, and welcome to another great edition of NCAA Lax Gameday here on Lacrosse Radio Network on Live 365 for In Lacrosse We Trust website. Happy holidays to everybody. This is Andrew Goldberg and John A. Iadevaia as your hosts, of course. You can tweet at us at NCAA Lax Gameday, at Goldberg, GOALDIEBERG, and John _A_ Iadevaia, IADEVAIA, or as John just told me, Johnny Vowels. And you can like us on Facebook at NCAA Lax Gameday. You could also Skype one of us if you want. I don't know John's Skype name, but mine is Andrew.Goldberg12. And John, what is yours?
John.Alfonso.Iadevaia.
There you go. So you can Skype at us. Maybe we'll answer you mid-talking, and that'll be interesting via Skype. Don't forget to also stay tuned, because after this show at noon, you're going to join Philly Wing fanatic Rocco Granado, a.k.a. the biggest Philadelphia Wings fan that I personally know after meeting him once. He drives his own little, Prius-type vehicle that has Philadelphia Wings all over. It's nuts. Anyway, he'll be hosting NLL pregame live, so definitely stay tuned right here on Live 365 after that. John, before we get going here, how were your holidays?
Very festive, very needed actually. I'm Italian, so we have the Seven Fishes dinner on Christmas Eve. It was also my dad's birthday on December 24th, so the bigger day than it is for most people. Then Christmas and the 26th, we have family and friends dinners we usually go to. Very nice, to just relax, have some nice cold weather and a nice bonfire. And as is also tradition, The Godfather was on for most of those nights as well.
I've actually never seen The Godfather.
You've never seen The Godfather?
Yeah, I am probably the worst person with movies. You can name any classic movie, like Shawshank Redemption or Godfather, like any 5 of them, or like even Rocky. Haven't seen them.
Wow, I've never... Rocky, especially. I would have expected everyone to see Rocky by now.
Yeah, you would think, I'm kind of a big sports fan, I'd get into the whole Rocky thing.
Wait, what,
just hasn't done it for me. I just haven't gotten around to it, been too lazy. I don't know what it is, but...
Wait, what part of New Jersey do you live in?
What?
What part of New Jersey do you live in?
Northern Jersey.
Oh, okay. If it was Southern Jersey, then I would have said that it'd be a little more disappointing since, the whole Philadelphia region right there. Plus, I consider Southern New Jersey...
Philadelphia kind of stinks, so...
I consider Southern New Jersey Philadelphia already as it is. To me, they're traitors. I've been there before.
There is no Central Jersey. It's just Northern and Southern Jersey. Northern Jersey is with New York, and Southern Jersey is with Philadelphia.
I feel bad for New Jersey. How do you consider a state then if the northern part's really New York and the southern part's an extended Philadelphia?
I don't know. How is Delaware considered a state? How is Rhode Island considered a state?
Good point. Actually, you could say the whole Northeast is technically just extended Boston also.
Yeah, the whole entire New England area is just Boston crazed. So I don't like New Hampshire, Maine. I don't know. It's kind of just like woods and snow up there.
But they do have lumberjacks.
They do. They a lot of flannel shirts, a lot of axes, a lot of beards.
Got their own rugged beards.
Crunchy beards. I guess that's where the Boston Red Sox got their beards from.
Probably played a factor into that.
Yeah. So anyway, today we decided to get into the spirit of the holidays. Obviously, with it just being Christmas, we decided to hand out some gifts to some college lacrosse teams across the nation. John and I will do that a little bit later. We'll hand out our gifts to help some college lacrosse teams as they approach the 2014 season, 5 teams each about. And we'll give our 2 cents for whatever it's worth, and we'll see if they actually listen to us come the season. And before we get into the gifts, we actually are going to go finish up previewing the conferences. We started doing that towards the end. We kind of did a bad job on that. That's on our part. But we kind of were looking at anyone who didn't listen to our first show. You can find it on NCAA Lax Gameday on YouTube. You can go on our Facebook page and like the page and then listen to it there as well, so you don't have to go to YouTube and try to figure out, where it is. But anyway, we're going to start off here with the conferences. We were kind of looking at the teams that were new, and there are definitely a lot of teams that are new to each division. In the ACC, you have Notre Dame and Syracuse. In the Big East, you have Loyola. Who else we got? You have in the Atlantic Sun, you have 2 new programs coming in. You have, Loyola's actually in the Patriot League.
Denver's in the Big East.
Yes. Who is that?
Denver is in the Big East.
Right. Denver makes the move to the Big East, which makes absolutely no sense. And then you have Furman, and who else? You have Furman and not High Point. You have Furman and Richmond making their college debuts in the Atlantic Sun Conference, which is probably one of the worst conferences out there just because it's made up of lower-end Division I teams and new teams like Furman and Richmond. So I guess let's start there. Let's start at the bottom. Started from the bottom, now we're here. Take it away from Drake. So what do you kind of think about this conference, Sean? I think personally it's pretty, looking at the teams, it's pretty weak. They're just going to get an AQ because they're, a conference, but that's really it.
I think that it could be a conference that becomes one of those good mid-tier conferences down the road because of those southern teams. Like we were discussing last week, how in time I think Jacksonville could be a team that battles for a top 20, could be a top 20 potential team, probably more in the lower tier. But having the good weather down there really benefits them because they're able to play lacrosse 24/7 without any weather interruptions. You also you have Richmond and Furman as well, right there in that Virginia-based area. That's actually a decent spot where they are also in that area. You're right between North Carolina. They can play some good teams there, and you're also very close to Maryland as well. So the list of opponents is pretty good actually. So you have good teams, good quality teams that you're going to be able to compete and really offer that to the recruits that are coming in. Plus, don't forget you have Richie Meade as well down there. That's going to help turn that program around quickly at Furman, right?
Right. I mean, that's what I was going to say. I would say if we're going to look into the future, because right now this conference is okay at best.
Maybe the sacrificial lamb conference right now.
Exactly. I mean, it's kind of just like everyone's kind of getting their feet wet into the competition. I mean, Jacksonville had a really good, or not a really good first year, but they had like a pretty solid first year. Didn't they beat was it Loyola or
they did beat one of the.
They played really tough the first year.
Yes, they had a good debut season, and they actually have played well since then within their conference. Unable to win the conference tournament last year or the year before. I think they were favorites in those actually before Detroit won those.
Right. So I mean, if we want to forecast like a future here, I would say Furman is probably the best spot, obviously because of Richie Meade and what he did at Navy. I mean, look, in terms of Navy, I'm pretty sure this is true, but John, you can tell me I'm wrong because I probably am. Is that, I mean, at Navy they have certain limitations in recruiting because you can only recruit guys who are like 6'2", 220. I mean, obviously those make great athletes, but you can't really there's no room for taking a guy like a Joey Sankey who's like 5'9", like 180, and is a great lacrosse player. You kind of have to have like certain limitations because they're going to eventually become part of the service and serve our nation and protect us.
Well, the
Don't allow us
academics
from talking.
The academic part is also the biggest stipulation. Years ago, decades ago, Army West Point was like the most difficult school to even get accepted to. Even if you had like a 4.0, it was still even hard, because everyone's trying to get into there. But now Navy's academics have actually matched up to West Point's in recent years. Both schools, both military academies, are pretty hard to get into. But they've also taken, I've seen it actually, they have been starting to take some smaller guys. Army, especially, has had some smaller guys under 6 foot actually play for their lacrosse teams as well. Obviously, you see the biggest one being Garrett Thule, who is a 6'4" beast, but you don't see it as often now in both academies. And we'll get to Navy in a little bit, but they could really use the help in terms of scoring and creativity from those smaller guys, especially.
Right, exactly. So I mean, if Richie Meade is coming down to Furman, I think he's going to have a lot more, free reign to really recruit really good players. He's not going to have limitations, obviously, in terms of people shying away from coming in to serve the country. They could go to college, have a normal college life, have fun, not be waking up at like 4 o'clock doing marches and all that stuff, which really turns off like a lot of top tier players. And obviously the weather is a good factor. They're down there in Georgia, or is it Georgia?
What?
It's Georgia, right? It's down. I mean, it's down south. It's like Georgia
I
or
believe
South.
yes, I believe it is Georgia. I could
Right.
look it up.
So I mean, you got great weather. You're going to be out there just like Jacksonville or High Point or Richmond with really good weather. You're going to be out there all the time. I think You're right outside Atlanta, or at least
Oh
really
no,
close.
Furman is South Carolina.
Right, South. Okay, so South Carolina. I mean, even so, you're still gonna have great weather. You're gonna have access to a beach. I'm sure, if you want to go there for a weekend or something with your buddies. So I mean, look, it's a great spot. You have a really great coach there, who's a tough guy who knows how to get the most out of his talent. And I think if you're looking at it in the future, like we're saying, I think Furman is going to be the team that's going to be the ones to beat in this conference. I think the rest of the conference is really going to have trouble. I mean, VMI has been there for a while, obviously Virginia Military Institute. I don't think they're that great of a team. Mercer is a new program. I know of their coach because I played against him for 3 years before he left after my junior year at Drew. He was the coach at Goucher. He brought in 3 All-Americans. They were top 10 in the nation. I think he's a really good coach. Obviously, he's got better advantages because he's got scholarships, D1 type thing, really good facilities down there in Georgia. High Point, I'm not really sure where they would really be going here. And Richmond, obviously, it's in Virginia, so they got a talent pool of kids from Virginia, which is a good lacrosse state. You got North Carolina, which is like an up-and-coming lacrosse state in terms of talent and blue-chip guys. And then also you still are close enough to Maryland and far enough to attract guys from Maryland to come to your school who want to get away from their families and stuff. And just to point out, North Carolina, when they went to fall ball, or when they were in fall ball, they played Ohio State at the 3rd annual Thumbs Up tournament, which is to aid in Ohio State's scholarship for Joe Bresci's son, who died at the age of, I believe, 3, obviously way, way too young, but they set up a scholarship in his name, and they play the game in Maryland because so many players from both teams are from Maryland. I think there was about 13 on UNC and like 13 or 14 on Ohio State. So clearly, even though it's in North Carolina, obviously there are advantages in North Carolina, big-time sports, Nike endorsements, all that stuff. But, they can obviously draw kids from Maryland down south to North Carolina, and I feel like, Richmond has that ability as well.
Just a quick question before we move on. We're going to make predictions in a later show, but who do you see as the favorite today in this conference? It would be Jacksonville, I would say, right?
Honestly, I'd probably say it's a toss-up.
I mean, I just find it so too hard to give it to a first year program, honestly, even with Richie Meade at the helm, because these guys have not played a single game of NCAA Division I lacrosse. At least Jacksonville has been around there for a while, and High Point's in his second year, and I don't expect much, honestly, from Mercer or VMI right away.
Right. I mean, Mercer's in the second year of their program. VMI is, I think it's been there for like 4 or 5 years, and they just can't get off the ground. So I definitely wouldn't say it's VMI or Mercer. I think you would have to say Jacksonville. I mean, according to Inside Lacrosse's preseason poll, based on what they're seeing, they're putting Jacksonville at the top, and they're actually putting Richmond at the bottom, and Furman second from the bottom. And they actually have High Point at number 2, but I would say Jacksonville is kind of the overwhelming favorite if you had to pick one out of all those first years and conglomerate lower level D1 teams. I would say that they're definitely the team to beat.
I actually wrote the preview for this upcoming season on Jacksonville. Coach Van Arsdale, honestly, he has been able to push the program to new heights, honestly, and it will be interesting to see. I do think, and I stand by it, that they can compete for or could be considered a top 20 team in the lower section. But again, they're going to be the underdogs in most of their games against the upper echelon guys. But I think that this is going to be a conference to watch for down the road, though.
Yeah. I think obviously with so many new programs, it's gonna take a very not a very long time, but it's gonna take 3 to 4 years before we really see what's gonna happen here with this conference. Obviously, we don't know who else is going to pop up as new teams that are coming in to play Division One, and we also don't know exactly if any teams will move with all this conference realigning, which we'll get to in like 2 seconds. But so we're kind of in the Atlantic Sun, so let's go to another smaller conference. Let's go to the MAC, the MAAC. Last year, Detroit Mercy actually had a losing record and won the conference and went into the NCAA tournament. They ran the table. They were like something like 1-4 or 1-5 in conference, whatever the number was. They ran the table in the conference tournament, won the conference tournament, and then they played Notre Dame very, very tough. They almost upset them before Notre Dame's talent took over and was just too much for Detroit Mercy. But honestly, the rest of that conference is very weak. You have Detroit Mercy, you have Siena, Marist, Canisius, Quinnipiac, Manhattan, and first-year program Monmouth, which is in Jersey. What do you make of the MAAC?
Stronger than the Atlantic Sun, but it's going to be another one of those conferences with those lesser teams. A few years ago, though, I do know that when Brian was still in the MAC at that time, they did make a good run, and I think they brought credibility, but obviously to the MAC at the time. But now as it is, you don't see any teams on this list that are really threatening. I think Detroit could become a little stronger this year, but usually Siena is the one that everyone goes to, and probably again this year they are the team to beat.
Right, and I think that actually I don't even know if they're the team to beat, because based off of last year they were 1-3. They didn't even do that well in conference. I mean, you look at a school like Marist per se. I know a couple kids just from the area who I played rec ball with went up there. Corey Zindel, who graduated in 2012, he was a really good player for them. He kind of, I mean, look, they weren't anything great. They were like at their best, they were a 500 team, and they were modest. I know he was a good player for them. But I mean, you look at the rest of the conference. Monmouth is a first-year program. Obviously, they have a draw that Monmouth is in South Jersey, literally like a minute or two from the beach, which is a huge draw. Obviously, it doesn't play in during the winter because winters here in Jersey are like winters everywhere in the Northeast. But in a couple years, I think that Monmouth could be a really good draw in terms of getting New Jersey talent and taking it away from, say, Rutgers or any of the Philly school teams like Villanova or St. Joe's or even some of the Maryland teams like Maryland, UMBC, Towson, all those schools. I think they could make it a really good draw just because it's right by the beach. The campus is really beautiful. So down the road, I think Monmouth is a good team this year. Not so much at all. Manhattan, obviously lower level D1, Quinnipiac, Canisius, the same thing. Siena, they play some teams tough. Obviously, up in upstate New York, they play Syracuse and they play Cornell at a conference sometimes, but usually they're kind of outmanned there. And Marist is kind of like, I don't know, probably like ranked in the 40s around there. So I wouldn't consider Detroit the favorite just because of last year. I mean, they made a nice, Cinderella run, but I don't know. I just don't trust anyone in that conference. It's very similar to the Atlantic Sun.
I still think it's a little better, but to your Marist point, though, they did have a great season last year with getting double-digit wins for the first time in 10 years, but they lose so much. I think last year was, you built some teams just have those like that class or that one team that you build up for, and they weren't able to get it done. I think Marist just has too many holes they've got to refill for this year.
Yeah, I mean, the only couple difference makers, just looking at the all-conference list here, on their team is goalie Dave Scarcello out of Marist, and then long pole midi Patrick Eaker out of Marist. Most of the other guys are either from Siena or Detroit. Canisius holds the other two spots on this list with Adam Donner, the defenseman, and Tim Edwards, the midfielder. Otherwise, like I said, it's all Detroit or Siena who are picked, according to NCAA Lacrosse, to be first team. To be tied for first or battle it out for that automatic bid. So after looking at the MAC, we'll go right to NEC because you mentioned Brian, who kind of moved into the NEC. Looking at this conference, I think Brian is the unquestioned favorite. You have Robert Morris, Hobart, Mount St. Mary's, St. Joseph, Sacred Heart, and Wagner. A lot of those teams are not very good, especially Wagner. I know the head coach there used to coach at our school, and obviously he's a former MVP for the Boston Cannons in Matt Posque. He's been there for a couple years, but they haven't been able to get out of the cellar, really, despite his best efforts. I mean, he is a really good coach. I just don't know what. Maybe it's just really hard to recruit into Long Island with other schools like St. John's and Stony Brook there. And obviously the top talent in Long Island going to better schools like Princeton and Duke and Maryland and all that. Anyway, I think Bryant is the unquestioned favorite in this conference, and obviously it all starts with Kevin Massa, the face-off man, who won like an ungodly amount of 70% of his face-offs.
Do you remember last year just how they played? He was remarkable, honestly. I mean, he basically won them the NEC conference game last year against Robert Morris. And the thing with Robert Morris, is for them with the new rules, they were probably the one team that was helped by the new rules because they played that style even before it. So the fact that I think they could have beaten Bryant because of how Robert Morris looked, they actually had shored up their defense, but they struggled immensely. They could not win any faceoffs during the season, and it really hurt them in that championship game. And Bryant is just a tough team, though, as I said, and I think they are a good example of this NEC team where they're not cakewalks. The NEC teams are not exactly going to be cakewalks because I think this is a conference filled with teams that are going to give you a fight if you're not ready for them.
Yeah, looking at the top three and looking at this all-conference list, most of the guys are Bryant, Hobart, Sacred Heart for the most part. Bryant's got 5 guys on the list. Hobart's got 1, but the one guy that they do have is Alex Love, who I'd like to mention because I put him on my list for guys to really watch to be drafted into MLL. In a couple weeks on January 11th when they do the MLL Collegiate Draft. He's one of the top attackmen in the nation. He had 45 goals and 10 assists last year. I really like his game, and he might not be able to carry the team by himself, but he'll certainly give teams a lot of trouble. And last year he was instrumental in helping Hobart win their first game at Syracuse
Yep.
in God knows how long. When they upset them and actually gave them like their last loss until they just turned it on, won like 15 straight before losing to Duke.
Yeah, I really liked how his game played, and Hobart's another one of those teams. I don't think anyone expected that game was actually named one of the biggest upsets of the year from Inside Lacrosse. Honestly, their win at the Carrier Dome against Syracuse. But you got to look at also those teams: Bryant, Robert Morris, Hobart. Those are the probables and likely to make it to the NEC conference. And Mount St. Mary's, they've won in the past, but you have to wonder, are St. Joe's or even Sacred Heart going to challenge for that fourth spot? I don't think St. Joseph's will, even though they're in an easier conference now after escaping the CAA. I think Sacred Heart though could sneak in if things go fall their way.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Mount St. Mary's has more of a history. I know they've won the NEC. I don't know. I'd say a couple times. I think the last time I've really seen them play in the tournament was when they got blown out by Virginia. I'd say 3 or 4 years ago, maybe sooner. So they have like a history. I mean, based on the coaches poll, you have Bryant number 1, Robert Morris 2, Hobart 3, Mount St. Mary's, St. Joseph, Sacred Heart, and then Wagner at the bottom. Do you think that list is about right?
I think it is. I think it's just about accurate. If my thing is Bryant doesn't, I wouldn't say they don't have a dominant offense though. But then again, there's no defensive stalwarts in this conference as well. Like Robert Morris should run away with the scoring title in the conference and once again be in the top 3, 5 in the nation when it comes to scoring. But with that said, though, do they have also the intricacies like that Bryant has? You know, winning ground balls, face-offs, or just getting consistent play. Not saying dominant play from one part of the field, but consistent play from both ends of the field.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing, the last note here before we go to another conference, is I think that with Bryant, while they don't have the greatest offense, I think they have the greatest offensive spark plug in terms of Kevin Massa, who will win. I mean, he could really challenge to win 80% of his faceoffs, which is ridiculous. I mean, even to win 60% of the faceoffs in college is an incredible, incredible number. But to win 70% like he did last year is unfathomable. And the fact that he was only a sophomore and could win near 80% this year and it's not out of reach for him is, I don't have the words for it. I'm at a loss for words. But I think he's the main difference because if he's winning all these faceoffs, obviously it means less possessions for the opposition. And it means when you score a goal, you're coming right back down their throats and putting more pressure on the defense to play when they're already tired. And they're not getting a break, and I think that's the biggest thing. And I think that's what we saw in the national title game with Duke and Syracuse, where Duke just won face-off after face-off after face-off with Brendan Fowler and just wore down Syracuse, and Syracuse wasn't able to get the ball back, and once they did, they were in too big of a deficit. So, as you had mentioned, St. Joseph's had come away from the CAA. So let's look at the CAA because I think it's a really interesting story. We have two teams both of us really kind of like and are intrigued by in Penn State and Towson. Penn State would be the unquestioned team to win the conference if they were eligible to play in the CAA conference tournament, which they are not because they are moving to the Big Ten next year with Maryland and Rutgers and Johns Hopkins, and I think that's it. But Penn State is a really good team. They bring back a lot of offensive firepower. TJ Sanders, obviously they have a great goalie in Austin Cott coming back in goal, one of the top goalies in the nation for the last 3 or 4 years. Towson I'm really intrigued by. I really like seeing them play. Last year, specifically, I saw them play live at Navy. Thomas DiNapoli is a really good attackman. And they will have to replace Andrew Wiscavage in goal, who's an honorable All-American last year. But I'm really intrigued by them, and I think the big question is, can Towson take that spot? and get back to national prominence? And also, Penn State, can you make the tournament without winning the CAA?
Well, here's a look at what Penn State's going to have to do without the safety net of a conference title. Here's the big part of their schedule they have to watch out for is February 15th, they've got Loyola. Then on the 22nd, they're at Notre Dame. March 1st, they're at Ohio State. And then March 10th, they're at Denver. So those are their big matchups on the schedule. Then don't forget, they still have to win those conference games, even though they're not going to be in the discussion for the CAA conference tournament. That's a pretty difficult really requirement for this team. And that's why you wonder why the CAA did that, especially considering that, they are a conference affiliate. I've covered the CAA for a long time. They did that to Old Dominion and to Georgia State, who were two original members of the conference because it's a basketball conference. So they weren't allowed to play in all of their sports for the year when they made that decision a year or two ago that they were going to Conference USA. So we're doing this to Penn State. It's not new, but I don't agree with it, honestly. And you're now putting the Nittany Lions in a difficult position now to make the NCAA tournament as an at-large bid in an extended field, which is still going to be difficult to make.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned all those teams that they have to play. That's like a gauntlet. And it's not like they're getting all those teams at home. They're having to travel to Denver, to Ohio State, to I forget the other teams you mentioned, but
Denver and Notre Dame.
Yeah, so they're having to go to Notre Dame. All three of those teams are considered to be top 10 teams, basically. And you're having to, and not to mention that you're traveling pretty far. I mean, Penn State, you're at the end of Pennsylvania, so Notre Dame and Ohio State aren't that far. But going to Denver to play a top 10 team in the high altitude with a high-powered offense, I mean, that's going to be really tough for them. And honestly, if they can't get maybe even a split between those teams, between those 3 or 4 opponents, I think they could be in real trouble in terms of making the tournament. They may be considered a better team than last year because they really didn't miss too much there. But I think that if they don't split or at least go one game above, like they only lose one game in that 3-game series, I think they'll have a really tough shot at making the tournament this year.
Especially, let's say they do split, or even if they do split 2-2 on that trip and maintain a respectable record going into the conference slate. If they trip up against any of the CAA teams outside of Towson and maybe Drexel, that's going to put even more pressure on them. Like if they lose to a UMass or a Hofstra or Delaware even, that's not going to look good on their resume. Realistically, they cannot lose more than 4 games.
Right, exactly. And the crazy thing is Penn State, when they were even eligible to compete in the conference championship last year, they didn't even win. They lost to Towson last year. So it's not like Towson's a walk, a cakewalk.
And I think that goes into our discussion with Towson now. Is this the time for them to really seize the conference? A lot of people think it is, but they have to prove it now. Sean Allen's done a good job of turning the program around. I see they're very stout defensively and they're good blue-collar players. But it's now people aren't going to be caught off guard or aren't going to expect little from them now. They know that they're going to have to play their A game when they're playing the Tigers. And what helps Towson this year also is that they don't only leave the Maryland area 3 times this year, when they go to UMass, when they go to Hofstra, or when they go up to Marist. That's it. Otherwise, their other road games are in the Maryland area. So realistically, that's not till later on in the year that they have to leave. It's only because of the CAA.
Yeah, so they're going to be fresh. They're going to be coming off the bus. They're not going to be having to really travel and stay overnight for the most part. A lot of their trips are probably going to be only like, I don't know, what would you say, like an hour or 2 at the most?
At the most, probably.
Yeah, and that's probably not even that much because maybe they'll play Maryland or UMBC, who's not far at all for them.
Their away schedules in the Maryland metro area. They're at Hopkins. They're at Loyola. There's another one they had here. That's it, actually. Yeah, there are only 5 road games, and they're going to Hopkins and going to Loyola. And the other 3, as I said, Marist, Hofstra, and UMass, not till later in the year. And those 3 opponents aren't really the strongest people that are expected to be favorites over them.
Right, so they have a real chance of making some noise early on, especially if they can take advantage of the quote-unquote not home games because they're in Maryland, but they take care of business at home, and then they also have like not really road games per se. It's kind of like the Giants traveling to play the Jets at home. I guess I would equate to it.
Right.
So I mean, I think they can really make some noise. So I think that'll be the interesting thing to look at is Penn State and Towson, who finishes 1-2. Obviously, Penn State can't compete in the tournament, but they can win the regular season title. So let's look at the ECAC tournament. We got like 4 more conferences before we get to our holiday gifts edition, which I know a lot of people are really fired up for because we got a lot of good stuff coming in. So let's just fire it off. ECAC, the Big East. Big East first. We got Denver, who joins the conference, as we mentioned. Top 10 team, we got St. John's, Villanova, Georgetown, Providence, Rutgers, Marquette. Personally, I think this is a really underrated conference, and I think it's a pretty deep conference. Denver's a top 10 team. St. John's has a really solid team. They have a couple all-conference guys on this preseason list, and obviously it's led by Kieran McArdle, who put up 80 points last year, one of the top attackmen in the nation. Villanova has one of the top defensemen in the nation, John LaCasio. He had like 56 caused turnovers last year, and the next closest guy had 38. Georgetown's a big name. They're kind of on the down year. I'm going to preview it in our gifts, but let's see what happens there. Rutgers has one of the top. If it wasn't for Kevin Massa and Brian Fowler, I think that Rutgers face-off man, I forget his name. It's a real tragedy. I should have it on me. But he's very good. He's from the Long Island area.
Joe Nardella.
60%. What was that?
Joe Nardella is the face-off man for Rutgers.
Right, Jordan Nardella. He was great. I saw him in the fall ball when they played UMass and Johns Hopkins and Fairfield. He was really good. He was dominant for them. And obviously Marquette's kind of more of a big-name program. But what do you think about the conference? I think it's pretty deep.
I think that it's really good. I think this could be the funnest conference of this year outside of the ACC, honestly. There's arguably 5-6 teams that could make this tournament, and they're all going to be competing. I did a piece on Kieran McArdle, actually, and they're going to be in the discussion a lot as one of those teams that people are going to have to watch for, because that attack line, the best in the nation right now with McArdle, Cernuto, and the third one's escaping me for some reason, but the attack line is very phenomenal. The only thing is I saw them play fall ball at St. John's, and I think their biggest weakness is going to be goaltending. I think that St. John's is going to have to outscore players and outwork them in order to win games, really, because their defense to me just wasn't impressive and looked undisciplined at times. But then again, it's the fall, so things could wrap up, but the team will go as far as McArdle and their attack carries them.
Right. So speaking of scoring, that's a great segue. We're going to go right into the American East, which is no stranger to scoring, as Albany is the preseason number 1 in the coaches poll, as they should be. Personally, I think the rest of the conference is pretty bleh. It's UMBC, Stony Brook, Hartford, Binghamton, Vermont in that order in terms of preseason coaches poll. Obviously, when you're talking Albany, you're talking offense, and that's about it because they've got about 40 Thompson brothers, the whole entire clan, and they can certainly pile on the points.
I saw them play Yale at a fall ball tournament. The Thompsons they're, as you would expect, they're still very, very good and fun to watch. But it's also notable they now have actually it looks like they have figured out their midfield now. As their coach, Coach Morris said that they figure it's more like hockey lines, their midfield. They use so many of them, but they all contribute, though. And that's the thing. As long as they can get that clutch secondary scoring from the midfield, they'll be fine. And it looks like their defense, their goaltender, Riordan, is a hot and cold goaltender, but the momentum he can bring really helped push Albany over Stony Brook last season when the Seawolves almost upset them at home during the conference tournament. Otherwise, I only see UMBC really being the only team that could compete with Albany, but otherwise it should be the Great Danes all the way here.
Right, I think we're in agreement on that. We got the ECAC the Ivy League, the ACC, and the Patriot League. I think all four of these leagues are pretty deep. Actually, not really the ECAC. I think Ohio State kind of runs away with it. One shocker I saw in terms of Inside Lacrosse's kind of rankings is that they put Maryland as the 6th worst team in the ACC. And because it goes Syracuse, Duke, North Carolina, Virginia, Notre Dame, Maryland. And it's funny because Maryland almost won the conference last year, but they lost so much firepower and experience from their senior class. They do bring in a loaded recruiting class, but you look at who else everyone else brings back in that conference, and it's just some of the top names in the nation. And I think the ACC is going to kind of be like the Big Ten in basketball, or even the ACC in basketball now, or the SEC in football. They're just going to beat up on each other, and it's just going to get ugly. The Ivy League, I think, is really, really good. Or in terms of depth, I don't think they're really, really good, but I think they're really deep. Princeton, obviously, Tommy Schreiber's really good. He's going to lead them. Cornell, we're going to have to see what happens there. I'm not too high on them. Yale brings back Brandon Mangan, who's the top attackman in the country, and then Penn brings back a lot of their defense, which led the nation in scoring defense at like 7.6 goals per game. And in terms of the ECAC, like I said, I think Ohio State runs away with it.
I think with the Ivy League, it's a league similar to the CAA and like the ACC this year, where the conference games are going to be very big, and I do expect to see some upsets somewhere. Still to this day, Harvard, if they can just figure out and put everything together, I still believe that they will be competing in the conference tournament. But for years now, they've just have not been able to do so, which has been, I guess, frustrating for a lot of people, considering how many straight years they've had a top recruiting class, either number one or at least in the top 5. To me, it should be Princeton that wins, but the Ivy has really surprised us in the years. I don't think Yale three-peats. I think they lost too many seniors from this past year that were too pivotal, and there's a lot of new faces, as I saw in the fall, especially at the midfield and in some places in the defense where they still have to figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be a dogfight similar to the ACC. It always is. I mean, all the Ivy League games are low scoring. It's kind of which team obviously makes the least amount of mistakes. I think just like NCAA Lacrosse has it, Princeton is the number 1 team, but I don't think they're that much better than, say, the rest of the pack. I think it's kind of like Princeton as a 1, and then Yale, Harvard, Penn, Cornell as like all high 2s, kind of just like a mix, a conglomerate. Like all those teams could finish anywhere from 2 to 5, and obviously you wouldn't be shocked if they won the conference.
Nope, not at all. And I do agree with you. The ECAC, Ohio should probably win it, but I do look to Fairfield to giving them a good fight, though. The program has really done a good job of remaining consistent in the past few years. Although now without Sam Snow, I'd like to see if they can find a new true leader on that team to carry them.
Right, and I think the last note here before we go to commercial and go to our gifts. I think the ACC, like I said, is going to be a huge dogfight. Like, honestly, you wouldn't be shocked, just like the Ivy League, if any of those teams won the conference. And I think you could have as many as 4 or 5 teams from the ACC being in the top 10, and only one of those teams can obviously win the tournament, which is crazy to think.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so let's take a break real quick, and then we'll go right to our gifts. So really stay tuned for that, because I'm really excited about it. John, I don't know about yourself, but I really like this segment that we just thought of yesterday.
Can't wait to play Santa Claus.
Oh, yeah. I'm Jewish, so this is like, a big deal for me.
Lax Prospects is the elite website for coverage, ranking, scouting, and analysis of the top prospects in the game. With content written exclusively from professional coaches, scouts, and GMs, prospects.inlacrossewetrust.com is the place to be for the future of our game.
Hey, this is Scotty Comer from the Barry Blizzard, and you're listening to Over and Back on the Lacrosse Radio Network.
Lacrosse was meant to be free for everyone. Every week, the Lacrosse Radio Network brings a free lacrosse game broadcast to you. Between Canadian box to professional field lacrosse, we are your home for free lacrosse content. The Lacrosse Radio Network. Lax on.
This is Patrick Crosby, goaltender for the Kentucky Stick Horses, and we're listening to the Lacrosse Radio Network.
Canadian lacrosse is a new home. The Lacrosse Radio Network. From the summer to winter, get all the free Canadian lacrosse broadcasts you can get. With the Canadian Lacrosse League, Quebec Senior Lacrosse League, Major Series Lacrosse, and Junior A with the best announcers around. Tune in to Spreaker.com/Lacrosse Radio Network.
Oh, ho, ho, ho! We are back here on NCAA Lax Gameday. That was really lame. I'm sorry for our listeners. But anyway, we're back, and I'm playing Jingle Bells and Christmas music, even though it's past Christmas, because we're about to hand out gifts to 5 lucky lacrosse teams to help them win and improve for their 2014 season. Because this is Christmas and I'm in the giving mood, John, I want you to go first with your teams.
So first I thought about what teams need coming into this season. And first I thought, let's look at Navy. I think Santa Claus should buy them a battleship. Why, you ask? They need firepower. They need help with their goal-scoring woes. Last year, they were arguably one of the worst offenses in the nation. They were very low in terms of shots. I think they were they were third in the nation when it came to third lowest in the nation when it came to taking shots or shooting percentage in total. They just could not muster anything. Seeing them play against Colgate, seeing them play at Citi Field last year, just no creativity with the ball, just unable to really generate quality shots. Rich Soul also almost lost his job. Many speculated about that, but I look at Navy as a team where their defense is good enough to win the Patriot, but their offense is something that will just sink them again if they cannot figure it out. So, having a battleship at your midfield would definitely probably blow some goals past the goaltender, I would imagine.
Yeah, watching them last year, I know I continue to harp on one game, but I watched them last year, and I kind of did a preview for the website here on In Lacrosse We Trust. They really struggled on offense with getting shots off. They did have one shifty player from up top. I forget his name. I don't know if he was a senior, but he was a really nice player. He was kind of their initiator from up top. They're going to miss Dickey in net, who's a really big goalie, took up a lot of net. He was a former Chaminade kid product, and I think he was really big for them. They're going to lose him, so there are questions in goal, too, for Navy. So, personally, I don't think it's just the offense. Obviously, a lot of it's going to be on the offense, which is shocking because they do have a former Stony Brook head coach there who, brought in Mark Matthews, and they made that big run in the NCAA tournament a couple years ago, and he did that basically because of how strong their offense was. So it'll be interesting to see how they go forward with Navy.
What do you got next? What team is on Sandra's list next?
All right, so I want to go to Georgetown because I want them to get back to national prominence. I want to give you the gift of respectability because the sport needs it, and everyone in the lacrosse world will greatly appreciate it. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Hoyas, and they are kind of the football equivalent of Texas University. They're the Texas football of college lacrosse, as I'd like to put it. They have a rich tradition of great lacrosse. They're a couple years removed from the stepping down of Dave Urick, who's the legendary head coach. They were 4-8 last year, and they were like barely 500 the year before. Kevin Warren has come in. He brought them to a 6-9 record last year. Specifically, they lost to Mount St. Mary's, which I consider a really bad loss to them. I think they got blown out in that game. But it was kind of weird because they also played Villanova to a 3-goal loss in the Big East semis, and they almost upset Syracuse at home. So they do have the potential to play well. They do lose their top 4 scorers in Travis Camus, Zach Guy, Brian Casey, and Dan McKinney. They do bring back Charles McCormick, Riley O'Connor, and Jeff Fontaine. O'Connor and McCormick are really strong for them. They had 50. I think O'Connor had 55 points last season. They're 2 of the best attackmen in the nation, so it'll be interesting to see them play. Defensively, they'll miss Brandon McNeese. They do bring in number 37 ranked defenseman Eddie Baltz. In goal is a big question because they played Jake Haley, who started 13 games, but he only had a 48 save percentage, and they switched him with Alex Joyce, so they'll be battling out for a spot there. I think they're still going to be rebuilding, but I want them to come back to respectability because I think it's good for the game.
I agree with you as well. Georgetown, when I started following them from 2007 to 2011, the final years of Coach Urick, to me, they arguably should have made the NCAA tournament in 3 of those, and I believe that the selection committee was very wrong in leaving them out, especially the year 2010 when Hopkins had that 500 season and should have made it, or also the year that Hofstra got into the tournament without even making the CAA tournament. Those 2 teams, to me, shouldn't have deserved it over a team like Georgetown, who beat a very good Villanova team on the last day of the season to get in. But to this upcoming team with Kevin Warren, similar to Coach Anflo at Marquette, both coaches employ a very good blue-collar system. They get the best out of their players in every game. They even had that thrilling Battle of Bethpage win over St. John. So I think Georgetown is on the right path to respectability, and I do think that we could see Coach Warren finally get the best out of them once they get enough skilled players at Georgetown.
Yeah, and obviously it's a great spot because, they're right in D.C. It's a beautiful campus. It's one of the top academic institutions in the nation. It's like right outside the Ivy League, and, it's an attractable spot. So speaking of attractable spots and top learning institutions, I understand you have something for Princeton.
Well, for Princeton, to me, this is kind of in the same respectability, a similar gift to them, but to me, it falls to Tommy Schreiber and to finally really where's the word to put it, the best gift to put it in, but it's time for Schreiber and Princeton to rise to the occasion. So if anything, they need a motivational song. That's what they need, because Schreiber has been the best player, or at least midfielder, in Division I since he came to college, and this is his final year in the NCAA. So to me, this is going to be for them a big year. Schreiber has got to step up and prove that he can do it. In a sports analogy, when it comes to pro sports, I think that he is a great player, but he'll really establish himself in the Princeton lore if he can really drive them to an Ivy League title and a deep NCAA run. The pieces are there. He's now the veteran, the leader of the ship, and to me, it's time for him to show that he really is who people think he is.
Yeah, and I think the incredible thing is that he put up about 64 points last season from the midfield spot. A lot of the offensive production that occurs in the NCAA is either from like a crease attackman who finishes off, a crease midfielder or attackman who finishes off passes from the quarterback of the offense, which is usually an attackman, or one of the attackmen like a Rapinoe who kind of does everything. So I think for him, if he can somehow keep the same numbers as last year, and I mean, he's a good two-way midfielder, so I think he is the key for Princeton.
Can I just say also, I think that Yale is their kryptonite. They've been the past 2 years now. The Ivy League championship's been them and Yale the past 2 straight years, and they just cannot beat the Bulldogs. And if anything, this is going to be the year they do it, because Yale don't know if they're going to be on the rise to really compete again or be as competitive as they were. And with Cornell's, situation as they are there in the off season, this would be the best time, if not the only time, that Princeton really can take advantage of the Ivy League as it is.
Right, and you know what? For those of you who follow really any sport, is that there's always that one team that gives that has the other team's number. I mean, just speaking from experience, when I played at Drew, the one team that always had our number was Goucher. The one team that we had our number on, who we always dominated, was Scranton. So to speak to your point about Yale, is maybe it's just Princeton, it's going to have one of, maybe this year is the year where they break the streak. I don't know. Just every team has that team they just always give a hard time to and always beat. And obviously in the Ivy League, it's a dogfight. So for me, my next team is going to be Albany. I want to give you some defense because God knows you're going to need it. As I mentioned in our preview, you got Miles, you got Lyle, you got Ty, you probably got, Guy and Bry and every other Thompson under the sun for you to compete on offense. You're gonna put up the points. You're gonna probably lead the NCAA in scoring again, just like you did last year. But your defense is going to struggle. You're losing your top two defensemen, Anthony Ostrander and Jack Nicola. You do bring back LSM, John Newhouse, and close defenseman Cody Futia, but I really am interested to see, like you had said before, Blaze Reardon. He was a freshman last year. He did not have a great year. He only posted a 49 save percentage, 11.93 goals a game. And obviously anyone that follows lacrosse, great goalies can make up for bad defensive mistakes. And even if he can improve marginally, I would say 52%, this team's going to take the next step. And they also have to replace their face-off man in Kevin Gluckert. So you need defense, Albany, and I'm prepared to give it to you.
I would have
given next team.
My next team is the Hofstra Pride, and I would say they should probably either get a leprechaun or a horseshoe, or in fact steal a leprechaun from somewhere, because they need some good luck to go their way. The past 2 seasons, they have been on the unfortunate end of numerous one-goal losses, which has really crippled them. And especially last year, when it looked like they got off to a 4-1 start, they just knocked off number 2 Notre Dame, and it looked like they were on their way to having a very good season. They just started losing games by 1 goal. The loss to St. John's was a big turning point, and then followed up by another 1-goal loss to Drexel, which completely sunk their season because they never recovered. They lost to UMass by another 1 goal, which ended their CAA hopes. For them, they just need to find a way to come out on the good side of 1-goal wins because they have the defense. Now they just need the timely scoring or a few bounces to go their way.
Right, and I think that's the question with a lot of teams, not just Hofstra. I feel is that you need the ball to bounce your way, and in terms of Hofstra, you got to figure out how to come out on top. So one more team each here, as we have only a minute left, is I want to go to my favorite team, Maryland. I want to give you guys the gift of experience because you have a crap load of talent on that team. Defensively, you're going to be perfectly fine. You got Nico Amato back there. You got first-team possible All-American defenseman in Goran Murray and Michael Earhart. So you bring in the best recruiting class in the nation. You bring in the number 2, 3, 8, 11, 16, 35, 40, 56, and number 87 ranked recruits in the nation. So you're going to need all the experience you can get because defensively, like I just said, you're going to be fine, but you lose a lot of offense. You lose Kevin Cooper, John Haas, Jake Bernhardt, Jesse Bernhardt, who's an LSM, but he had 11 points. You also lose Owen Blyle and Billy Gribben. All those players combined for 142 of a possible 211 points. That's 67% of your total point production. So you need experience. If you can play well with losing those guys and live up to the number 1 recruiting class, then you guys are going to be great, and you're going to you're going to prove the critics wrong. Actually, John, we have to go here, but too bad we couldn't finish our list, but obviously another great edition of NCAA Lax Game Day. Happy New Year to you and, to you and your family.
Happy New Year's to you as well.
All right, thanks for everybody for listening, and have a Happy New Year as well to you guys.